Hello, I'd like to call to order the City of Littleton City Council virtual study session for Tuesday, May 26, 2020. It is 6:30. All council members are with us, and we have two items of topics tonight. Our first one is, ID number 24-144. The CARES Act update that we're going to get from our finance director, and what council, what they're looking for us, staff is looking for us, is they're looking for us to provide direction on the review, the criteria, timelines, and first phase of the expenditures. So I'll turn it over to the city manager.
All right. Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, council. So before we have Tiffany kind of run through her presentation, just a reminder here for the public. We've been talking about the CARES Act here for the past few weeks. Last week, the council approved an intergovernmental agreement between us and Arapahoe County for our share of the CARES Act. The Arapahoe County portion is about $4.2 million, and the Jefferson County portion is about $200,000 roughly. So this portion of the CARES Act was directed to populations greater than 500,000. And so both Arapahoe County and Jefferson County qualified, and they went through a process to allocate those funds back to the cities. So there's been a lot of discussion, as the council's well aware, that what's the intent, and we're still working with the county and the Treasury Department and trying to sort out some of the details. We do not have all the answers here at this date, but we are hopeful that in the next month, perhaps shorter, maybe longer, that we'll sort through these issues here. So tonight really is about kind of sharing some of the specifics here and some kind of an evaluation criteria here that we'd like council to respond to, see if this makes sense, and a timeline for when we'd come back. And then we also have a series of suggestions here on the part of staff that we look for reimbursement or pursue an expenditure here much sooner rather than later. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tiffany Hooton, our finance director.
Okay, good evening, council. I'm going to go ahead and start my presentation here and get us started. All right, can you see the presentation?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, so tonight we're gonna go over the CARES Act, and Mark kind of already gave a highlight, so I'll try not to give what he said, but we'll talk about the CARES Act funds. We'll talk a little bit about the use of the funds. We'll go over a phasing plan and a prioritization. And then we'll review our recommended actions. So as Mark kind of already discussed, CARES Act was provided to populations of 500,000 or more. Jefferson County and Arapahoe County did receive these funds, and I believe they've already both actually received the funds. They did come to a conclusion on a way to distribute to the cities within their jurisdictions. Littleton actually is in 3 counties. So we did get a portion from Arapahoe County and a portion from Jefferson County. And they kind of followed the federal guidelines on distributing those funds to the cities within their counties. And the counties retained 55% of the funds while providing 45% of their funds to the cities within their counties. The total distribution to City of Littleton is $4,409,413. If you recall, on May 19th, council did approve both IGAs with the counties. The counties are both custodians of the funds, so they have financial fiduciary responsibility as well as reporting responsibilities. That's the reason for the IGAs. And they kind of outlined the reporting requirements from the cities and how they're going to distribute the funds to Littleton. They do have final determination on the eligible expenditures, And we'll kind of talk about what is an eligible expenditure a little bit later. And then I mentioned they did define the reporting requirements for cities. One thing that's a little different with both counties that I just want to remind everyone is Jefferson County did allow half of the funds to be distributed initially to the cities, with the remaining half to be requested to be reimbursed through December 30th. And Arapahoe County is a little different. They are requesting reporting monthly. So when we have a final approval from them and we have expenditures to remit, we will be remitting monthly to Arapahoe County for reimbursement for those funds. So there's not a whole lot of clarity on the actual use of the funds. If you read the CARES Act, there's three main things that they require for CARES Act funding. One is the expenditures have to be necessary. They have to be incurred due to the health emergency of coronavirus COVID-19. They also cannot be accounted for in your most recently approved budget, the date March 27th. And then the expenses have to occur between March 1st and December 30th. So we have until the end of December to actually remit or request a reimbursement from the counties, which is kind of why we want to talk about a timeline and when we want to actually expend those funds. Not accounted for in the budget, the most recent budget means, if it's already included in our 2020 budget, then we have to justify why the funds might need to be or why they're needed, or explain to them how they're not included in our current budget. And I'll talk about our appropriation for council also. Additionally, they did note a few expenditures. They must be necessary due to the emergency. The one thing that there's a lot of discussion on amongst all cities, states, and counties is the funds can't be used to offset lost tax revenue. So there's a lot of discussion about waiving fees, but using CARES money to remit those fees to different organizations. And we cannot use the fee or the funds to offset any lost revenue. And then any unspent funds as of December 30th have to be returned to the Treasury. There's also a list of ineligible expenditures, but the list is fairly short, and there's a lot of these allowable and non-allowable expenses are purely subject to interpretation. But some of the ineligible expenditures are, damages covered by insurance, payroll expenses for those not dedicated to COVID-19, expenses that are being reimbursed by any other federal program. So if we're gonna request reimbursement from FEMA and we get reimbursement from FEMA, we can't duplicate those reimbursement efforts. Another ineligible is reimbursement to donors for donated items or services, workforce bonuses or hazard pay. There's a caveat: if it was included as part of your original pay philosophy or pay procedures, then that might be eligible. Severance pay is not eligible, and legal settlements are not eligible. I think one of the things is that we've been talking with the county pretty regularly over the last couple of weeks is, a little more definition from the Treasury on what's eligible and what's not eligible. A lot of it is subject to interpretation. So the county's working with their attorneys as well as the city's attorneys, and they're also providing guidance along the way. We've gotten one or two follow-up to some specific questions that cities have asked as to whether it is allowable or not. I think the one thing that is very clear is that payroll expenses, we're waiting for the Treasury to provide us some more guidance on that, just because there's a lot of personnel that's related to this emergency, and wanting to make sure that we're requesting what we can and that it's eligible. I think we're hoping to get some clarification with this week from the Treasury on a few specific items, particularly related to personnel reimbursement. So I'm expecting that hopefully this week from the county and originally from the Treasury. Then we'll also talk about review of the potential expenditures. We did solicit from the departments a list of things that we felt might be eligible or things we want to look at. And just to kind of give you a reference, the majority of those expenditures are related to public health. So that's more so responding to having the building partially open in the future, moving offices around to make sure that we're social distancing, doing some retrofitting on other buildings within the city. So majority of that went to that. And then economic support definitely was part of that. And then other, there's always a category of other, and that's the one that we definitely will have to reach out to the county to ensure that we're following their guidelines as well as eligible expenses. Some of the things that we identified were, business grants and rental assistance, business recovery programs, which we've already did a phase 1 on. And then also, like I said, accommodating public and employee social distancing, routine disinfecting. That definitely is going to be an added expenditure to the city. So we've included some costs for that. There's a lot of technological improvements to enhance teleworking capabilities. We talk about computers and laptops for employees. We talk about expanding our network capabilities so people can access the servers, and definitely PPE supplies throughout the city as well as the police department. And then there's also some unfunded mandates related to FMLA requirements. They did change FMLA requirements this year as a result of COVID. And so there's some unfunded mandates that we are required to meet as a result of that. So as far as a phasing plan, we mentioned there's about $4.4 million total. And I'll tell you, in talking with departments, there was a list of well over 10 million of things that are directly or indirectly related to COVID that potentially could be reimbursed with CARES money. I think one thing that we have to focus on is, how are we going to spend that wisely and in support of the CARES Act? And so we didn't want to provide you with a lengthy list and then just go forward with that. So we wanted to make sure that we have a plan on that. So right now we're going to be talking about some initial things that we want to move forward with and ask for some support of that. And then we'll come back in a month and kind of review what we've done. We'll also talk about what the kind of a next phase of recommendations are. And then in September, we'll come back after implementing even more of those, and we'll kind of monitor and revise it. And then at the end of the year, we'll kind of finalize the use of funds. And this kind of follows some requirements from the counties where we have to remit monthly and make sure that we provide them all the documentation that they're requiring for any expenditure that's related to the CARES Act funding. I think the one thing that we want to kind of keep in mind is, there's a lot of discussion about a second phase or what's going to happen maybe towards the third quarter, maybe even to the winter months this year. And so we also want to make sure that we're reserving some of those funds for some future expenditure that we might not be aware of currently. So we want to make sure that we hold some of that back in the event that there is a second wave or we have additional changes that we have to accommodate. As far as prioritization, we want to make sure that we align with the council goals. We want to make sure that we're following our reopening guiding principles, which when we talk about some of the specifics, you'll see how they align with that. We want to take into account Littleton Rise objectives. And then we certainly don't want to duplicate what the county or state initiatives are doing. So we want to make sure that we talk with other cities and counties in the state so that we can kind of look for partnership opportunities with these. We've already started this in the economic development area with Denise and her group working with the other cities in Arapahoe County to see how we can leverage those funds countywide and kind of come up with some similar objectives and processes so that we're not causing additional work. And then I already kind of mentioned the contingency plan for the second wave. So some of the recommended actions that we have currently, like I said, we had over $10 million of initial quick review of things that could be related to COVID. So we kind of had to dial that back down a little bit. We grouped this in categories that relate to Arapahoe County's reporting requirements. And so we kind of grouped up, we have economic support, and I've got $400,000 there. 150,000 of that is asking for reimbursement from phase 1, which would allow an additional 250,000 for a phase 2. And then we order and purchase a lot of laptops for our employees so they could telecommute. And with that came licensing for Microsoft Office and Adobe and other software systems that employees need in order to continue doing their job from home. And then we talked a little bit about our rental assistance. There's an opportunity to provide some rental assistance, maybe through a housing authority or at the county level. So we definitely want to pursue that and look at providing that service. And then I believe we're going to talk later, the weekends on Main Street, the business support. That's one thing that I would like to reach out to the county and explain to them how that is providing economic support to our businesses downtown and request that this be part of the CARES Act. So those are a few things that we're talking about on our phase 1, if you will. As far as fiscal impacts, we already kind of talked about the $4.4 million, both from Arapahoe County and Jefferson County. Phase 1 includes 1.1. That'll leave about $3 million, $3.2 million to address the future needs and some of the other things that we have on our list to ensure that we have funding in case there is a second wave. I think some of the things that we have on our list that are not included in phase 1 there's a lot of software related items. You know, we have a lot of people telecommunicating to work and a number of concerns about cybersecurity. You know, we already have concerns with the city on that, and having more people working from home and using email and having a lot of fake emails, if you will, coming through. There's a lot of cybersecurity issues and concerns. So we want to make sure that we vet that with the county and provide them good details on how that's related to COVID and our employees working from home. You know, our HVAC system, there's some things that we'd like to enhance with filtering and moving air around throughout the building. And again, those are things that we want to make sure we submit to the county that they're in support of. We have some security cameras and more IT related items that we want to address, but we need to ensure that we have support from the county because as I noted, they are the ones who are ultimately responsible for reporting at the Treasury level. I think one of the things that, you know, we want to make sure that we have funding for too is I mentioned FMLA unfunded mandate. So we want to get a little more guidance on that and make sure that we're allowing ourselves to get reimbursed for costs related to that. And then, you know, we also have personnel costs. You know, one of the requirements is that the funding or the expenditure can't be in your 2020 budget or your budget as of March 27th, although we have a number of employees that have changed their focus and are working on COVID-related items throughout the city. And that's definitely one area that we're waiting for guidance from the Treasury and the county to see what might be available to be reimbursed for measures related to that. I think as far as timeline, we already talked about, I'll come back in May and June, and then September and December, kind of giving some updates and information to council on phase 2 and phase 3. So I think with that, I'm going to go ahead and open it up for questions. I know we have some stuff here that might be able to address some of the questions, and Mark and I are certainly available as well.
Tiff, Jerry, I have a clarification question. So phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, what are you talking events that may be coming up or particular dates?
Yeah, so I would correlate phase 1, 2, and 3 with the dates that will be coming back to council. So this meeting right here would be considered phase 1, and then in June, I believe June 23rd, we'll come back with some additional recommendations to council on what we might be able to use funds for. And then phase 3 would relate to the September meeting to kind of see if, is there another wave coming through? Do we need to refocus? Do we need to get more PPE? Do we need to make more retrofitting in some of our facilities throughout the city to kind of accommodate that? And so I think being flexible in these phases, we have a laundry list of things and items that we would like to use the CARES funds on, but I think we need to be strategic and make sure that we're adjusting as we go to accommodate, because there may be things that come up between now and even June 23rd that maybe becomes a priority that we have to address that might not be on our list currently. So that's kind of the phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3, and then the final reporting in December.
Tyler, if you could bring back council so we can see who has questions. I'm sure we have questions. So now, by the way, on the phase questions, because if we don't use the funds, we lose the funds. Is there a date that they have to be used by?
Yes, they have to be spent by December 30th. Arapahoe County, I believe, has requested that we have all the information by December 24th, I believe it is, to ensure that they have all the paperwork that they need. Because, these funds will definitely be audited by the Treasury.
All right.
We have plenty of requests and items that can be related to COVID. It's just a matter of prioritizing and understanding what direction we want to go.
All right, council, let's open it up to questions. Who wants to start? Kelly, if you will.
Hey, sorry about that. Thanks, Tiffany, for the presentation. How quickly can we start spending those funds, or are you waiting for more guidance from the feds?
Well, there's some things that we've already spent that will likely be reimbursing, like PP&E. We've bought a number of masks and other equipment already at the city level that will likely be requesting under this. So there's some things that we already have. I think some of the larger purchases, definitely the county wants us to work with them to get kind of pre-approved, and they're working on a form for that so that we can remit a request to them as to what we can spend it on. So like Main Street, the downtown weekends on Main Street, we're already looking at that. And so we definitely will, if the direction is to move forward, then we could go ahead and spend that. It would just be a matter of requesting reimbursements.
And with the small business grants program, is there with capping it this next go around at 250, is there some thinking that maybe in the future there could be another round of the grants? Thanks,
I think Mark's dying to chime in.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. So, it's my recommendation here at this stage to allocate about $500,000, and the council could actually add to this later. You could reduce it. So it's just a kind of a allocation at this point for a combination of business grants and rental assistance. I'll talk about rental assistance in a second here. It's allowed per the act. My recommendation at this stage is, as the council knows, we went through the first phase of business grants using city funds, and we spent $150,000. And we also had a series of people who qualified under that same program, but we ran out of money, and therefore we couldn't assist them. My suggestion is that we go back to that same list here and look at a second round using the same criteria here now with federal funds, and that we try to do this in the near term. There's a few things we talked through with staff here to kind of reaffirm maybe the details of that, maybe a few tweaks on the part of council, but try to report back on what that program would look like next week. That's also could allow the council to look at a third phase of business grants, and you could completely change the criteria and look at something very different. I think the other important thing about a third phase, and Tiffany touched on this, in the meetings the city managers have had with county staff here in Arapahoe County, there is a lot of coordination around the business grants very specifically. The county is wanting to assist what they would call medium-sized businesses, and the cities would probably focus on the smaller size cities. And so I think there's some work to be done about defining the difference between the two. In fact, there is the mayor and I, we attend a periodic meeting with the county commissioners and mayors. And this Friday, there's going to be a little bit of a discussion around that very issue. So that's a long way to say that at this point, I'm recommending that we allocate about $500,000 at this point for another round of business grants. The rental assistance is a piece that we need more clarity from the Treasury Department. It is allowed per the Act. I think if the council has interest in this, it could be perhaps targeted towards individuals, citizens, low mod income levels, could be perhaps even business oriented. But we would be looking specifically to contract that out to somebody like South Metro Housing Options instead of the city pursuing our own rental assistance program. That's what other cities have been done. That's another example of the coordination that's being discussed here in the last week or two. So that's a piece I just wanted to touch on, the recommendation here for an allocation of about $500,000.
Scott, do you have any questions at this time? No. Carol? No. How about Pam?
Yeah, I just want to be clear, in the memo that was in the packet, the 150,000, is that our first round of grants? Okay, so that's already, and so we would kind of be reimbursing ourselves out of the lift fund. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, and then for the business recovery grants and rental assistance, is it allowed to give individuals things other than rental assistance, or for individuals, that's all?
It is, again, targeted towards rental assistance. That's the language of the Act.
Oh, okay.
But there isn't necessarily a lot of clarity there from the Treasury Department. So finance directors have also been working on this issue with the county.
Okay, and then my other questions. So could we look at things other than rental assistance, like internet for people that are used to using the library and can't get into a library, or bill relief, or no, it's just rental, it just makes the most sense?
Well, the rental assistance, again, is just a very specific statement within the Act. The council could decide to do nothing with rental assistance and focus the revenue towards other purposes. So I think that the process that we're laying out here for the next couple of months here more is an opportunity for us to bring that brainstorm of possible projects from staff to council using some of the criteria that we're suggesting here, and then let council decide how they really want to allocate this. Again, it took staff just a matter of a week to come up with $10 million worth of projects. So I think that's part of our challenge, is trying to decide what truly is the priority here in the use of these funds.
And then back to your question, back to a statement I think it was Tiffany made about the second round of business grants. Are you suggesting that, I think there was like 200 that came in and we only could award 60, that we'll look at those, everybody that put an application in, and then look at those individuals and not give others a chance? Or how is that going? What is your thinking there? Is it just too soon to say?
If I may respond to that, I think my discussions with both Tiffany and Denise Stevens is that I would like to take a look at the list of the businesses that applied in the first round that were not funded. simply because we ran out of money. I'd like to look at the criteria there, the businesses that did qualify, and come back to council in about a week with a recommendation of what we might be able to do there, specifically with the federal funds. Again, there could be a third round that could come later months that are it's just completely different criteria depending on where council wants to go.
Okay. And I think that was all my questions. Thank you.
Great. Karina, do you have any questions?
Thank you. Tiffany, when we look at, what we have already spent now, so thinking about the time and resources from economic development, from the marketing organization, and even the IT department, just to, make our community aware, to equip all, the staff, et cetera. So those costs where, it's, call it our payroll costs, that a significant portion of their time was fully dedicated to COVID related stuff. So wouldn't that be something that would qualify, that we can seek reimbursement even now?
That's one of the areas that we're waiting for clarification from the Treasury. It mentions personnel costs directly related to COVID-19, but we meaning the county, has asked for clarification from the Treasury Department, because I think what everyone is seeing is that we may have personnel who have a salary that's budgeted, but they have completely changed their focus to COVID related only. But according to the act, it says specifically that if it's already included in your budget, then you can't use the CARES funds for that. So we're looking for some clarification from the Treasury. And so I would say right now, as far as personnel related costs, the only thing that would be 100% eligible is overtime costs. So, there are potentially some overtime costs that our staff has had over the last few months that we can request for reimbursement. But that amount is pretty negligible compared to some of the other salary related issues. But we're just waiting for clarification from the Treasury on the personnel side of things.
Okay. The second opportunity is thinking about how do we change our business to support our citizens better virtually? So thinking about e-track it, and how do we get more of our permitting process through there? Thinking about e-payments, how do we get more customers to pay online? And maybe it's even providing an incentive that I think there's like a credit card processing fee that is an additional fee to people paying online. So how do we get more of our citizens to engage with us online or virtually? Because that's something that's even sustainable. And, if something else happens 2 months from now or whatever, we've already equipped ourselves. We've already made that investment.
Yeah, I think the city has made tremendous efforts in getting to where we are today to allow that already, but there definitely are some areas of improvement. And I think that's one of the things that we would need to submit support as how it's related to COVID-19 to the county, so that they can approve moving forward with something like that. I know the IT department has a number of items that they would like to look at and explore using CARES money for. So this definitely could be part of that. And I'm sure they've already identified some within their own department that we might be able to look for.
Mark?
And the third,
I think Mark was going to chime in there for you, Karina.
Yeah, if I may, just want to add on to Councilmember Elrod's comment there. I think if we turned over the $4.4 million to Ashley Bolton, our IT director, she would spend every single dime on exactly what you just described.
Yeah.
Ways to automate here, so that, quite honestly, in response to COVID-19, to make it much more acceptable for our citizens to engage. So I think you'll find the conversation with our IT director pretty robust.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I really do see that as a long-term investment, right? It's what we do now is something that we can continuously benefit from in the future. So third item is, while I know we had planned on doing remodeling and work on the city center, so maybe that starts to become a little bit harder if we have to retrofit because it was already in our budget. But when we think about our library and museum and how our community now may have to interact differently within those facilities. Is there some facility retrofitting, whether it's through furniture layout or even about more, I think it's called interactive programming. So think about the museum, that instead of, going into one of the homestead houses and someone showing you how to cook, you're experiencing from outside the homestead as some kind of interactive programming. So anything like that has been brought forward as a consideration?
Well, let me add my perspective here, since I talked with Tiffany and Keith Reister. Keith is also on the line here, but first, your one point, and we discussed this, I think, last week a little bit. We do have within the budget the use of impact fees to expand capacity at the Littleton Center. I think the CARES Act provides kind of a different view of all that. So we have kind of parted the two projects here, if you consider that here, using CARE and the impact fee, and kind of rethought what we're trying to accomplish. So the impact fees project is probably going to change to something a little bit different. There are physical improvements that are necessary in the Littleton Center as a result of COVID-19. And quite honestly, this is going to be one of those discussions that the council is going to get to see some more detail on what that could be. One example, quite honestly, is our council chambers. Everything's fixed, and that design does not allow itself to really good design for social distancing. And so we may want to look at the CARES Act to address some of that issue there and redirect the impact fees to something else. One example. Obviously, facilities has looked at multiple buildings. We've got 30 some odd buildings across the city that we're responsible for. The library and museum are just two of those 30 some buildings. And so, yes, they've started to evaluate some opportunities here on how we might retrofit some of them in response to COVID-19.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add, we do have a couple of other grant opportunities related to the library and museum that we're pursuing and exploring right now, to kind of shift how they do provide service to patrons. So we are exploring those opportunities too.
Great. Patrick, did you have any questions?
No, I'm good. Thank you. Great job, Tiffany.
All right, cool. All right. Anyone else have any other questions? Scott, please.
Yeah, Mark, I just wanted to follow up on Kelly's question from last week about providing assistance to nonprofits. I think in addition to our business community, our nonprofit community is a sort of bedrock in terms of the city's livability and quality of life. Is that somewhere this money can go?
Yes, in the discussions with county staff and the city managers, the nonprofits actually came up. It's back to a very specific request we'd make to the county justifying that support. It would have to be directly related to COVID-19, but there's many examples in our community here where I'm sure we could probably make that up.
And then a second question I had is, if council decides to do some rental assistance with this money, is that money that can only go to people who are currently housed, or is it money that could go to people who are also currently unhoused?
Let's see, great question. I can't remember the specific answer to that. The homeless specifically is what you're asking about, Mayor Pro Tem? Yeah. My guess is that it probably can, but that's one we'd have to go back and confirm here, details. Tiffany's nodding her head.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Scott. Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you very much, Tiffany. Good report.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one thing. In order for us to formally spend the CARES Act money, you're going to see a budget amendment come forward in the next couple of weeks, so that we can appropriate the full $4.4 million. Again, I mentioned that if it's not in your budget as of March 27th, then it could qualify. So we want to go ahead and formally appropriate that in the next month or so.
Great. All right. Thank you. Mark, did you get enough direction from council?
I think so. I didn't hear anybody who necessarily took exception to some of the criteria we suggest on how we might evaluate this. And it looks like at this point in time, what I'm hearing is that the preliminary list here of immediate actions looks like that's probably acceptable at this point.
Well, I think council has enough time to maybe think about it and then get back to you. So council, if you could send any suggestions to Mark, to the city manager, that'd be great. Pam has another question.
One add-on, allocation of money for Main Street. What about other business areas like, I'm thinking Aspen Grove? Has that been considered, or that would be phase 2?
That would be phase 2. We've brainstormed a pretty fascinating list of how we might assist our businesses. We have looked certainly beyond Main Street, and so Aspen Grove has come up in the conversation. You'll probably see that next month in the discussions, my guess.
Okay, thanks.
Karina?
Just for clarification, where we can provide comments. So are some of these things, so let's use the Main Street support of 100,000, because I know that is opening up here next week. Is that already essentially an expenditure that we're going to incur, or is there still an opportunity, is there an opportunity for discussion around that?
Well, that is the next item on the agenda this evening. So if there's different direction on the pursuit of that project, then certainly we could do something different. In this particular piece here, the CARES Act, we're suggesting that we try to fund that event with CARES Act funding. If we don't do that and the council still wants to pursue that, then obviously it's coming out of the general fund.
Good. All right. Well, thank you. All right. Let's go ahead and move on to our second item, which is 1B. It's ID 20-145, weekends on Main Street updates. And we'll turn it over to the city manager.
All right. Thank you, Mayor, Council. So just summarizing here a couple of the last few weeks here, we did receive a formal request from the historic downtown Littleton merchants, as well as our business chamber, to consider opening up our Main Street right-of-way for an event here over the course of several weeks that would allow restaurants and businesses to access that space. So in response to that, we sent kind of a concept to Tri-County Health here a couple of weeks ago. They did respond back, gave us some preliminary comments, looked pretty encouraging. So at that point, we went out and directly to the merchants and had a conversation about what might be possible and who's interested. That also then led to a discussion about refining the plan. And we did resubmit back to Tri-County Health for comments here this past Friday. And so it is our hope that we have some kind of feedback from Tri-County Health this week, and so that we're poised to act on that as quickly as possible. I will tell you that there has been an amazing amount of work that's gone into this potential event. And I have to congratulate a couple of people here. I think Kelly Nardi and her staff, Elizabeth specifically, and we'll get into a presentation that they have on the effort they went through, talking to as many business people as we possibly could to manage the expectations of this and to refine how we would approach this. And also just Reed and his staff and Colleen Norton, our city clerk, trying to work through the ever-changing alcohol requirements here for the bars and restaurants. And I'm sure that Reed, in fact, I think we got an update today on this topic. So there has been just this whirlwind of information and trying to capture this into a plan. The other thing I just would state is, we've had a real challenge historically, in my opinion, trying to work through events like this, where we have associations or agencies, Hoodlum and our business chamber, who represent many of the businesses, but not all. And so when these events come back to the city, we're in a position being asked to somehow sort this out and to negotiate somehow an event. Not all people are happy. And so we do have problems with this kind of an approach. And maybe towards the end of this presentation, I would like to touch on what I believe is probably a more useful approach here in the long run. And that is through a downtown development authority and or a business improvement district I think it's time for our downtown to think in terms of kind of some level of self-governance and become more of a partner between the downtown and the city. Because right now, when we have situations like this, the city is not in a win position. It is very, very difficult. But we'll talk about that maybe later. And I'd like to turn it over to Kelly and her staff because they have a presentation about the details and what we've gone through here in the last couple of weeks.
Hello, Council.
Hello.
I was going to show you my face because I put makeup on, but I don't see it. So good evening to all of you and good evening to the citizens who are watching. As Mark mentioned, we submitted a preliminary proposal to Tri-County Health, got some feedback from them. Oh, there I am. Incorporated all of that feedback. Most of it was anticipated because we've been paying very careful attention. A lot of us have, Reed, Colleen, Elizabeth, and I, to the governor's health orders. We did submit the final proposal to them on Friday, and we asked for their approval. I didn't really ask for feedback. I asked for their approval, and I asked for it to be done in a very prompt way. If you saw the governor today or the news tonight, there are lots of cities across the state of Colorado who are trying to do something similar. So I just want to give you an update on the Open Littleton question that we asked. We had 2,341 responses, which is just mind-blowing. 94.8% of people asked, said yes. And the question was whether you would be interested in going to downtown Littleton and dining outside if such a program were offered. So you don't get 95% on hardly anything. So we're very, very happy with those results. We do have a call scheduled tomorrow with as many merchants as we could get in touch with, and that'll be at 10 o'clock in the morning. So we'll go ahead and start the presentation. This is just a graphic design, visual concept. The Littleton Business Chamber and Greg Ranke came up with the idea. We sort of developed the concept. And so we're calling it Weekends on Main. And this is the graphic design that we've come up with for the program. So I think a lot of you know Elizabeth Schofield. She's our marketing and event manager. She's really dove into this deep. Her organizational skills are second to none. So I'll let her go ahead and take over from here and tell you more about the program.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Like Kelly said, this is the logo that we came up with for the Weekends on Main. And so this is the ballpark of what we have. The restaurants that have committed are the View House, Palanque, which is also Adelita's, they changed their name, Grand Station, The Alley, Smoke and Fins, McKinner's, For Real, NT, Jake's, Born to Bake, The Tavern, The Chocolate Therapist, and Curds Nook location. I have not been able to get into touch at all with the Melting Pot, Old Town Tavern, or Ned Kelly's. But I've been told Old Town is interested in participating. We're planning on closing Main Street at 3 p.m. on Fridays to 9 p.m. on Sundays, and service will be allowed outside until 10 p.m. So Main Street will be closed from Rio Grande all the way down to Santa Fe, but we are planning to keep the side streets open, which I'll show you in a map in just a sec. The city is planning to provide the table, chairs, and barricades. Each restaurant will need to be barricaded in, per se, to establish where their liquor boundaries are. We're shooting for a target date of June 5th, if we can get everything that we need. If not, we'll go to June 12th. And currently we're planning to operate on a week-to-week time frame based on how everything goes. We're planning to do a shared curbside pickup location at all the intersections of Curtis, Nevada, Prince, and Maine. And we'll have designated spots for those with signage. Littleton Police will work the events, and we're also working with our contractor that does a lot of staffing for us for the criterium to help us do some staffing for this project. We plan to mark the streets probably with a dot of like where measurements and tables can go. And then we'll have porta potties at each end of Main Street. And we've worked it out to get free parking with Arapahoe Community College. So here is a list of, Here's a list of who supports the project, who does not support it, and who's neutral. I've reached out to everybody that I possibly can. I went door to door. Some places are still closed. This was last week though. A lot of places are, gearing up their stores, doing a lot of remodeling work, but they're just not answering their doors. So this is basically where things stand as of tonight. Here is a map. Oh, sorry, my fingers are too sensitive. Of the road. I've been working with South Metro Fire on road access and what's doable and what's not. So all the green lines are obviously the streets that are going to be open. The pink squares are where restaurant locations are on Main Street. And we do plan on trying to keep Curtis Street, Nevada and Prince open. And the reason being, a lot of the merchants are still working on a curbside pickup and they really want that curbside access. So if they can't have it right in front of their store, the closest thing we'll be able to do is give them, each block. And that's what those blue lines are at each of the blocks locations. So this is a sketch of what an intersection could look like per se. Again, the buildings are the pink restaurants. This particular intersection is Adelita's on the left and the tavern on the right. And then on the south side of Main Street is, I believe, the Chocolate Therapy would be the closest one. So Curtis would remain open. Again, the blue lines on Curtis are the curbside pickup locations. And then you see actual tables 8 feet apart for each of the restaurants. And the yellow lines are Jersey barricades, which would be required by police to prohibit any vehicles from accessing downtown if we're going to leave the side streets open. So the red triangles that you see are potential staff locations, and then the blue triangle is LPD. So the thought process, and another thought process in closing or keeping the side streets open is if one block becomes particularly crowded, we could close down with our barricades a certain block. So we could potentially close down more people accessing between Nevada and Curtis. If it's too crowded, there's not enough social distancing going on. Whereas if it was Main Street and we closed the side streets, it would be almost impossible to close down and barricade in a certain block or area. So we could probably maintain social distancing in a block if we had to close it down per se. So for the restaurants, we will be asking them to sign an agreement that they will follow the Tri-County Health and the state rules regarding COVID dining, and that they will be responsible for the chairs, tables, and barricades. We're going to request that they remove the chairs, tables, and barricades nightly because Main Street will be closed down from 3 p.m. to 9 p.m. on Sunday because those Jersey barricades cannot be moved. They're not easily moved. They're about 800 to 1,000 pounds a piece. But we would still like them to remove the tables and chairs and barricades. That they each clean their designated area. We're requesting they operate on a reservation or texting system to minimize people coming out to stand in a queue for a table. They'll be required to do the state modification of premise permit and also fill out a very short, small permit for South Metro. There won't be any fee associated with the South Metro permit. It's just basically South Metro letting them know, hey, if you have a hydrant right next to your restaurant, you need to keep that area cleared. And they just want to, stay in touch with each of the managers of what they're planning. We're going to, try to work with all the restaurants to make sure they're mandating social distancing, no waiting areas, no hanging out. And they're going to be responsible for enforcing the guidelines in their designated areas. And I'm going to try to really reinforce to all of them that we're in this together. If, one restaurant isn't following all the guidelines, it's the possibility that Tri-County Health could shut us all down. So we all really need to work together on this. And then finally, we're going to try to incorporate a merchant program of putting like a profile and a picture of different stores along Main Street with a table tent of some kind on each of the tables. Some of the merchants have really claimed, they are just as important as the restaurants. We need to be doing something for them as well. So this is actually spending an hour on the phone with one of the merchants and trying to turn around her, turn it into a positive thing. We came up with this different program of profiling each of the merchants to and put something out for everybody to see for them. These are the guidelines that the state has put out. Actually, this is the draft version. And then here's some of the signage that we're going to be working on. One of the things that Tri-County Health suggests is that we communicate everything very clear so everybody's very well aware. So we'll have sandwich boards out with words just of stay 6 feet apart, let's keep Littleton safe. We're also working on getting some of the stickers that go onto the sidewalks of the streets that, are simple reminders of stay 6 feet apart. Benches in Main Street area will have to be closed. We'll be working on some free parking directional signs to ACC. The curbside pickup areas will have signage and sandwich boards. And these are also the stickers at the very bottom. So this is the registration and the agreement that we're going to ask each of the restaurants to fill out. It's a very short, simple registration form. And then after they fill it out on the right, this is a sample of what they will actually receive after they register. So some of the open issues and concerns, when I went around talking to all the merchants, these are some of the things that came back of what was their biggest concerns. And Bradford Auto Body, for example, just expressed that they want everybody to stay safe and who's going to enforce the mask and who's going to enforce social distancing. And then Public Works was concerned about what happens, if Friday afternoon traffic comes back and Main Street is closed. How are we going to handle weather cancellations and ADA access? The merchants kept saying, we matter too. These are our blood, sweat, and tear stores. We, want our stores to be successful too. Tri-County Health has suggested doing sanitizer stations around downtown. There's been concern since the restaurants will be outside if people will be smoking marijuana on the tables outside. And then some people are concerned about it not being sophisticated enough. And so I've been working on ideas to try to make it look sophisticated and draw in maybe families and couples a little bit more than just the young single crowds to come out for this. And then, of course, everybody is always concerned with parking. These are the final thoughts of, I'm thinking about trying to implement a survey that each person can go in at the end of the weekend and say, yes, this is working for me. No, this is not working for me. This is why, this is what we suggest, just to keep the lines of communication open with each of the merchants and restaurants. Trying to get them to maintain a continuity of appearance. So like we're providing the tables and chairs, they're all gonna look the same. We're gonna turn on the Christmas lights for an ambiance of downtown. But if we have all the tables and chairs the same color, same table coverings and everything, it should look really nice rather than each of the restaurants putting their old tables and chairs out there. I'm working on negotiating the expense of the tables and chairs with a couple different event suppliers. And then the last one was just to consider social distancing signage, which is the ones you see on the left, which actually, since I first did this presentation, we've already looked at ordering some, so we're good. And that's all I have if you have any questions.
Great, thank you, Elizabeth.
Sure.
All right, Tyler, yeah, thank you very much. It's funny how times have changed. Wasn't that long ago when we were talking about not allowing sandwich boards on Main Street. Now we're like going to be using them to promote a lot of stuff. Let's open it up to questions. Let's start with Patrick.
Yeah, thank you, Elizabeth and Kelly. Great job. Really appreciate all the effort. If we get an approval from Tri-County Health tomorrow, can we maybe start this weekend?
It's a great question, and the answer is, so the process that one of the restaurants will have to go through, they fill out that one-page application with us because we really wanted to make this simple for them. But then they have to get the modification of their premises for their liquor license. And initially, Colleen said that she thought that modification of premises would take 7 to 10 days because that goes through the state liquor enforcement division. But today she said that in talking with some of her colleagues that submitted those modification of premises requests last Friday, those businesses got approved today. So there's a couple of steps in the process that we need to complete before we can do it. And we don't want to do it with just one business approved or even 2 or 3, because we don't want it to look like it's not successful. So there's sort of a critical mass number of restaurants, like maybe a half a dozen, that we need to get their approval done before we fire it up and go rent all the equipment and shut the street down.
Okay. I saw the masks on there. Is that going to be something mandatory or is that optional as a concern?
The restaurant staff, it will be mandatory.
Right.
For everyone else, it's a personal choice. I mean,
Okay.
We strongly encourage it, and that's what Tri-County wants us to do, is to strongly encourage it and recommend it. And we'll have signage that says that, but we're not going to enforce it.
And then starting tomorrow, we're going to be doing the 50% occupancy, correct? Based off of their fire code. Is that what it's based off of? The 50%?
That's over my head. You might ask Reed to clarify that.
That is the rule, that it's 50% of what their fire code of how many they're allowed in the restaurant. So if their restaurant normally holds 100, they're allowed to hold 50.
Yeah,
And then Elizabeth,
50% up to 50 persons, whichever is less.
Yeah.
Okay. And then is this the same presentation you're going to be delivering tomorrow for the merchants?
It is.
Sorry.
And will we have access to joining that webinar or whatever it is that you're doing?
Sure.
Okay. I think I'd like to chime in.
Well, Patrick, I asked that it include all of the RISE group, which would include you.
Sure. Perfect.
Yeah, just one comment there. We just have to make sure that it's 2 council members or less. Otherwise, we have to post a meeting. And we probably run out of time for that since the meeting's tomorrow morning.
It's at 10 o'clock.
Right.
Is that it, Patrick?
That does it. Yep.
Karina.
Thank you. So thank you, Elizabeth and Kelly. I think this is really great work. I love the concept. I think it really is cool. As you know, we've heard from a lot of merchants downtown, and you did identify some of those concerns. Of those concerns and issues, have we been able to address them, or how are we going to address them? Any updates on that?
Well, we've addressed some and made modifications. For example, our initial proposal to Tri-County said that we would close Main Street at 9 o'clock Friday morning, because I thought it would be nice to get the Friday afternoon lunch crowd. But a lot of the retailers were very concerned about that. So we changed it to 3 p.m. And so I think that was helpful to some people. And so it'll just really start off with the dinner crowd Friday night. Elizabeth, any other modifications you can think of we've made based on feedback?
Keeping the side streets open was not an original plan, and a lot of them really wanted that curbside pickup, so we instituted that as well.
Yeah, we made sure that there's a designated spot on every block for curbside pickup, because we don't want to discourage the curbside pickup, because that's still very viable. Also, I think just to point out with South Metro that they've been really cooperative. we've come a long way with South Metro. We thought we were going to have to maintain a fire lane down the middle of the street, and they're not going to require that because the side streets are going to be open. So they will be touching base. Elizabeth mentioned a mini permit. So they will be touching base with each of the businesses to just make sure that, things with fire code are addressed, but it won't be, a full blown application with South Metro.
I have another question.
Yeah, please.
Some of the other recommendations were instead of closing all of Main Street from Rio Grande to Santa Fe, could we just close a portion of Main Street? And thinking a little bit about the easternmost part of Main Street, so Rio Grande to Prince. McKinners and Farrell have the parking lot behind. That might be a really nice way to do outdoor seating and helps to activate along Prince, as opposed to cutting off that section of Main Street as well, which is, an important arterial, even just for us that are traveling through our city. So to have the whole street closed down, I think, can exasperate some of the movement around downtown. Have we considered that, and what are your thoughts on that?
Well, we are keeping Prince Street open. So we think that's pretty important to keep the traffic moving through there. I suppose that's something we could consider, but I guess it's kind of the ambiance of the street. We're going to, Keith has been really helpful in Public Works. When I asked him if there was a possibility we could have the Christmas lights on, I thought it was going to be more difficult. And he was like, absolutely, we can do it. And I don't think we've ever turned the lights, not since I've worked here. We've never turned the lights on in the summer. So I think it's going to have sort of that ambiance downtown to just do it all on Main Street. But I suppose, that's something we could consider to do it in their back parking lot.
There's
Mark,
also,
you say something?
Yeah, I just want to add on to that. I think we've seen that recommendation. I think the application that we made to Tri-County was to activate Main Street. I think the staff is suggesting that we come up with a survey here of the businesses, the merchants here after 1 month. And I think that's probably the best opportunity for us to kind of reassess. I think if there is an opportunity to kind of open up more of Main Street and activate some of the parking areas, okay, I think that's certainly worth looking at. I think in the interest of time, we had to act on this kind of Main Street activation concept.
Right. Okay, Karina, back to Karina.
I'm sorry, my final one. Thank you, Council. Mark, I had asked you this a few times, that this concept, while it was presented with restaurants in mind, it really was also for retailers and merchants. But I don't see that in any of the plans, and even the design that was brought forward really looks, like restaurant, and it is primarily for that. But are we providing space and tables or even other types of furniture or whatever might be needed for retailers to also, be outside if they so choose?
I'll let Elizabeth respond to this as well, but I think that the feedback that we've received is that, setting up a table out in front of the retail business that doesn't really create the kind of ambiance most of those retailers want, that they have really beautiful finishes inside of their businesses and the way they're displayed and the lighting and all of that. And that they would have to, one commented they would have to leave somebody outside. They'd have to hire an additional staff person to have somebody outside monitoring their merchandise, and things will get dirty being outside. So, that's an option that they certainly could do, but we didn't really feel like anybody was too excited to, do something that kind of feels like a sidewalk sale.
But we wouldn't have to go back to Tri-County for that. That can just, if someone decides to do it, they can do it.
Yeah, they can.
Okay, great. And let's go ahead and get some others in here. Let's go with Scott and then Carol.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I want to echo my fellow council members in just congratulating Kelly and Elizabeth in the communications department. I love the creativity of this. I absolutely appreciate the hard work that's gone into it. Where I keep coming back to is this question of the city's role, right? And I think, as the city manager said, it is absolutely high time for the city to remove itself from this type of role and this type of decision making with regard to the downtown merchants, right? It's not appropriate for the city to be refereeing these kinds of disputes, right? Our job is to partner with the downtown merchants and help them realize and be successful with their vision, right? We're talking all throughout this in terms of this is our plan. Do you, and that's of necessity, right? At this point, it is of necessity that this is the city's plan, right? But you know, we're asking the merchants, do you like our plan? Do you not like our plan? It needs to be their plan. They need to have the organizations in place and the constituencies in place and the communications processes in place to be able to come to council with proposals that then we partner to make successful, right? It is absolutely time for a DDA or a BID, and it is absolutely time for the council to extricate itself from this role in these types of decisions.
Good point, Scott. Good points. All right. Is that it, Scott? Is that okay? Carol.
Thank you for everything you said. You hit it right on the nose. We need for the downtown merchants to become a mature and self-motivated organization and to work among themselves to make things work. The dynamic we've had for years of one against the other really isn't serving anyone well. And I'm very ready for the city to get out of the role of the mediator of this. So yes, let's get this one done really well and then count on the merchants to take it forward.
All right, thank you. And let's go Pam, and then we'll go Kelly.
No questions. All
Okay.
good.
Kelly.
Hey, sorry about that. I agree with everyone too. Thanks, Kelly and Elizabeth, for all of your hard work. I love the logo. I do personally. I think it's great. And I echo Scott's sentiments as well that we need to partner with the business district and not be leading the way, so to speak. So I have 3 questions. One is, if there are a number of businesses that you weren't able to get in touch with, i.e. Jackass Hill Brewery, if we got this up and running June 5th, June 12th, and some of these businesses did contact you, would they be able to join later in the process?
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay. Also, the hanging out, I saw that, there's no hanging out. Of course, we see on TV businesses that have reopened, and there's just a congregation of humanity at these places, quote unquote, hanging out. Are the businesses then responsible for monitoring that, policing that, making sure that people, and I'm guessing it's going to be hard to do at the bars. I could be one of those patrons actually hanging out, but how probably will be. How is that going to work?
Do you want to answer that, Elizabeth?
Sure. The restaurants are going to be responsible for their designated areas. So what happens within their coned off areas or on their sidewalk right in front of their restaurants, they're going to be responsible for managing that area. And that's why we're going to stress it to the restaurants that, we all need to do it together. We all need to keep the socializing down and the large groups to stop them from forming. But then if it gets to be areas that are not associated directly with a restaurant, we'll just have our staff walk around and kind of casually be like, keep it 6 feet or no hanging out. And that's why if we need to shut down a certain block, we can, if people are just congregating and there's just too many people in a small area.
Okay.
Frankly, I think that's one of our biggest concerns is managing the crowds, because I fear that we're going to have a lot of people who want to participate, and we may not be able to accommodate as many people as want to participate. Gatherings of 10 or more people are still prohibited. I've had people ask me if we were going to have a band down there and music, and you have to say, we're not there yet. This is going to be about those restaurants encouraging high turnover of their tables. And, that'll be up to them how they want to do that. But we're really encouraging them to do a reservation system so that people only come if they have a reservation, because we don't want hundreds of people to show up down there and think they're going to get into a restaurant because they're probably not going to be able to. So managing the crowd is going to be, that's the thing I'm most concerned about.
All right.
Thank you. And I had one last question. It's regarding parking on the side streets. How is that going to work if you've got cars parked on those side streets? There's not a lot of area for the cars to turn around to come back out. If they're parked close to Main Street and then they've gone to the restaurant or the bar or wherever, or to the shop, and then they've got to get out of that parking space to turn around to go back out. How is that going to work?
They actually aren't turning around. They can go forward. So those side streets will be open all the way through.
Oh, all the way through Main Street?
Yes.
Okay, I gotcha. Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Great,
Thank you
thank
for
you.
clarifying that.
All right, Patrick.
Is I'm going to say a bar allowed to have that space in front of their restaurant and no tables to allow people to congregate 6 feet apart?
That's a great question. So there are a lot of different kinds of liquor licenses. What we found out last week was that 4 or 5 of the establishments down there have what's called a tavern license. And initially we thought that the governor was not going to allow the ones with tavern licenses to open, but Reed has just recently discovered that the state liquor enforcement is not going to be as concerned about the type of license, but more about the type of establishment it is. So there are a couple of for example, the View House has a tavern license. So we were really worried about that. But it looks like because they do sell so much food, as long as they are selling food along with the drinks, that they'll be okay. Others down there that don't have a kitchen and don't provide food service, and there's a few of them, they're going to have to partner with a food truck or a restaurant or something. I think Colleen used the example this morning that you can't put Hot Pockets in a microwave and call that food service. It's got to be an actual meal being served. So, for example, if somebody like Ned Kelly's wanted to bring a food truck in and put it there, then we think that would be okay.
In that regard, could Ned Kelly's partner with Grand Station?
Sure.
Yeah, correct. So, yeah, I think there's a lot of flexibility here that we'll be able to make happen. Patrick, did you have any other question? Okay, I do have a question, if you don't mind. And really, it gets back to, Mark, your point on the bid. I know you brought that up over the last few years. What will be the process, and at what point will be a good time to start that process of getting the Main Street area at least on board with that?
Well, I do know some of the leadership within Hoodlum and our business chamber have interest in this. And in my opinion, it really does need to come from them. It's not something that the city can somehow impose upon them. So in the end, somebody in the downtown needs to be a champion of this topic. A little over a year or two ago, I can't remember exactly when, we hosted a couple of presentations about bids and DDAs. And, I think there was some that attended that, but I think, again, this needs to come from those current agencies down there, business associations. Now, it can happen in just about any time. The two are very different and have pros and cons. And so in my view, the DDA is a longer view, and a bid can be very narrow and very short term, depending on how you want to approach it. It really is their decision. What is it that they want to accomplish? And once they decide what it is, then certainly the city can assist them in trying to figure out what is the best mechanism to accomplish that.
Great. And regarding to closing the Main Street, that was the Merchants Association down there that came forward with that original idea. Then it was the city staff that sort of took it the extra step to really make it happen. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah. I also want to remind folks too, was it last year or the year before, we had a consultant come in and had suggested that thinking outside the block type thing, that closing Main Street on a permanent basis would be something that we ought to consider at some point. So I think closing it off at a temporary, at least for a week by week type thing until we figure out how to go on this, I think that's a good idea. And I think our traffic engineers will figure out how to get the traffic moved around in a safe and reasonable manner on Friday, especially. Right.
Yes.
Yeah. Council, did you have any other questions? I think Patrick had something.
Yeah, I was just going to make more of a statement than a question. And I know there's some people listening in, and I wanted to thank those merchants, primarily the retail merchants, for sending their emails out to, I believe it went out to all of council. You're being heard. We understand that the ones that are not in favor of closing down Main Street is good for your business. We're trying to look at this as a whole, and back to what Scott and Jerry said, you know, this bid is really the solution. So if this is something that you want to ratify yourself in the future, let's get involved. And when you send, I'm just making a suggestion, when you send a nice email like you've been doing, you know, if you can give us some solutions so we can take those into considerations. I think for the most part, it comes down to parking. You know, my people can't park, you know, in front of my store. I know Greg Renke had a conversation with a couple people, and that was their concern. And he said, you got 5 spaces at my lot for free. So that concern went out the window. I believe that parking is no longer an issue if they can park at Greg's lot and walk a half a block to the location where they need to go. If there's additional concerns in the future, just let us know what those are, besides just it's not good for business. We're trying to look at downtown Littleton as a whole, not as individuals.
Yeah, good points, good points. Karina?
Thank you. Elizabeth, you talked about a form that you're going to keep open for other merchants downtown. Will that also be accessible to perhaps residents, or, you know, I'm thinking offices that are downtown, so that it's open to the whole kind of area?
I'm not understanding. If merchants, I actually, when speaking to all the merchants, I asked them if they wanted to have space outside. None of them did.
Sorry, no, I was speaking about the form that you said that you were creating to gather input from some of these retail merchants. Is that form also available to people that have offices downtown, perhaps even residents of downtown?
It would be just based on whose email addresses I have, to be honest. So I have, I mean, I'm happy to add other people to them. And are you referring to the survey after the fact of how it's working for them? There's the form that they sign, they go online to register for the weekends on Main, and that's just for that particular form is just for the participating restaurants. Then there's another form that's going to be available online. That's the temporary expansion of their business form that they can fill out for that. That's totally separate. That's for like restaurants that aren't in downtown. But then I'm also hoping to initiate a survey after the first week or two to see how it's going, how it's, you know, it's working for everybody, what recommendations they have, et cetera, et cetera.
It was that one, sorry. It was the survey,
Yeah.
not only to those that are participating, but just to anyone that has a very vested interest in the downtown, right?
Right, I can send it out to as many email addresses as I have, and I'm happy to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Great.
So I would collect them from economic development, and I've also collected emails from Hoodlum.
All right, thank you, Elizabeth. Carol, did you have any other questions before we get out of this?
I don't, thank you.
Okay, Pam?
No, but I suggest maybe we could take a couple minute break before we move into the last two items.
Yeah, we're almost there. We can do that. And Kelly, I don't know if you have any other questions. I don't believe she does. Mark, anything else you want to add to this?
No, Mayor, but just other than thanking council and really the community here for trying to work through all this. I know it's times it's been emotional for some, but we are clearly in a unique position here, and I think we're doing our best to try to help our businesses downtown. So again, thanks to everybody.
Great.
Mark?
And I want to piggyback on Patrick's thought, as well as other council members' thought about the members who aren't, the merchants down there who aren't all on board with closing off the streets. We got to find a way to help them to maintain their business during these times too. So listen, we're not going to forget them at all. Great. If that's not it, if there's anything else, I mean, can we go ahead and take a 5-minute break? I've heard that request for a 5-minute break.
Patrick
has a question. Oh, I don't see him on there. Go ahead. I can't see all council members.
Can I just make a public announcement that there was an SBA scam going around? So anybody watching this, there it says, "Dear applicant, you applied for your SBA economic injury disaster loan." It's a scam. So just for those people that have done that, applied for that type of loan, make sure you're validating the address is coming from.
Great. All right. Well, thank you. Thank you. Anything else, council, at this point? Great. It is 7:58. Let's get back here by 8:03 if we can. That's a 5-minute break, if we could, please. All right. right, welcome back. It is 8:04, back from our recess. We're going to move into our administrative updates, and we're going to go to the city manager. You have a few items for us for council.
All right, thank you, Mayor. Let's see, coming out of our retreat here, the 1st of February, the council decided to put into place a new protocol on how to manage items on the tentative calendar. So if 2 or more council members are interested in at least having a discussion, then an item can be identified, and then I, as the city manager, will put that on a future agenda for the council to discuss. So the purpose is really to discuss whether or not it's necessary for further conversation at this time by council. The intent is that staff would not put resources into these topics here. So we do have 2 tonight, the lodging tax and also solid waste. We have a third.
We have a third item, yeah.
We do. And I kind of alerted council to this afternoon on that. I would like for myself and our city attorney to discuss the short-term rental issue here a little bit. So with that, unless there's any questions from council, Mayor, I'd suggest we look at the first issue, lodging tax. And council member Elrod was the one who raised this specifically with me. So I would suggest we start with her.
Let's do it. Karina.
Thank you. Okay, so the lodging tax. So just to kind of define what this is. So this is what we're asking is whether or not council would be willing to put a visitor's tax, which is what we're calling here a lodging tax. And I would actually propose that we start looking at it as a visitor's tax on the November ballot. So this upcoming November ballot, the revenue from that tax would go to support and enhance the quality of life that is represented by heritage, arts, and recreation. This is our heart section of our comp plan. This tax would be specifically imposed on visitors to our city that are going to be lodging within our city, either in hotels, motels, short-term rentals. So all of those could and would qualify. Some of the things, I've talked to a couple of council members. They've asked, why is this important? I think, given what we saw from the packet of the retreat, obviously this is one of the tactics we can employ from a financial sustainability perspective. We already have a short list of how it would potentially be used. We do know that there has been a need or an opportunity for an event or a conference facility at Hudson Gardens or maybe another location along the South Platte, the renovation and restoration of the Town Hall Arts Center, potentially activating the community trail as a history and art corridor, and then art in public places. So, creating that sense of place like you have from things like, the Blue Bear in Denver or the Antlers Arches in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, or the Bean in Chicago. So some of that. The other thing of why I think it's important now, it's one of those things that, hey, we should have done it 5 years ago, 10 years ago. But so here we are, right? So we know that the hospitality and entertainment industry has been probably one of the hardest hit, and it's going to be the one that's going to take the longest to recover from this. So the sooner we can put some more dedicated resources to this, the sooner we can help to stand or enhance, better said, enhance some of these entities and programming. I think what we want to take advantage of is the staycations that are going to be much more, the first kind of wave of tourism that starts building up again. I'll let Mark share some of the attributes from the latest Littleton, the survey that was done. I think we have those results. This is something we've had on the survey, I think 3 years now, if not more, and it's always come back very favorably in the survey, but I haven't seen the latest results. Mark, if you could share that. And then the other thing I'll talk about briefly is we did some polling last year. And, what we did see is obviously anytime you talk about a tax, you don't score high. But what was very encouraging about this one is when we talked about where that tax was going to be invested, it did jump somewhat significantly. And also the feedback that we got from the consultants was, that the opportunity is there is if we can begin to communicate, inform, and share, what this would be and who it's impacting. Because again, remember, this is a tax on the visitors and not on the citizens. I think our citizens are definitely tired with, taxes that have been imposed to them. So I think that it's a visitor's tax, I think begins to say, hey, let's share in the cost of what makes the city so great. So I think that's, some of the key reasons I think it's really important for us to do it now. We have some important deadlines that are tied to this. So Mark, if you can talk a little bit to that.
So we have asked the question about a lodging tax of, I think, through at least 3 cycles. Is Kelly Nardi still with the group here? She could speak more to the history here. I don't see her on the list here, but
Looks like she left.
she did. Okay. So yeah, the results have been pretty consistent here in each of those surveys. And so when you look at the supports and strongly supports, that percentage is well over 70%. And the question that we asked here this spring, this is before COVID-19, was well within the same kind of parameters. The question being asked in the citizen survey is a little bit different. It's more about looking to promote tourism, and as opposed to the arts and culture. I think Councilmember Elrod kind of talked a little bit about that, but there's a slight distinction between the two.
Okay. If I could, I'm going to start going around the horn with our council members, and just to get an interest on whether or not we want to proceed with this at this time or not, and go ahead and say if you have something you want to say. We'll start with Councilmember Fay, and then we'll go to the mayor. We'll save Mayor Pro Tem for last. So after Carol, it'll be Pam, and then Kelly, Patrick, and then Scott. So if we can start with Carol.
Yeah, having been on the previous council, I would like to point out that the decision has not been made, was never made, to use money from lodging tax for arts and culture. We somehow got to an assumption that if we had a lodging tax, it would be used for arts and culture. But we have 2 issues going here at the same time, and we have to be careful, Mayor, not to keep them combined, or else we'll end up confused at the end. We need 2 decisions. One depending on the other. If we decide to go ahead with a lodging tax, then we also need to decide what would it be used for. That decision has not been made. Again, it has been an assumption, and not everybody out there in the community agrees at all. For example, I won't even go into examples. They are, yeah, I'm done. Thank you.
All right, cool. And then we're going to come back around to everybody to see what their final position on whether or not they want to move. Mark, you have your hand up for a second?
Yeah, I'm sorry, Mayor. I think the Councilmember Elrod asked one question I did not address, and it is the timing. We had some of the material that was in the retreat, I think we shared with all the council here, but technically we need to respond to the county in very early September. They like a courtesy notification in July, but September would have to be whether or not we want something for the November ballot. So there's that deadline in front of us. And then sometime here in August, of course, the month of August, we're pretty much dedicated then to ordinance reading around this topic. So I just want to make sure it's the timing.
There is a timing issue. So what the question really for all council right now is do we want to bring it back for a July 14th discussion, which would move it forward or not move it forward? But if it moves it forward, then it's time sensitive, so it has to move pretty quick. So I'm going to go now. We'll go to Pam, do you have some comments you want to make before we go around to find out?
Well, yeah, in the survey results, it talked about 50% of the voters might be for this, but also the consultants in that talked about that they needed a higher standard in order to really think that this might pass, like somewhere in the neighborhood, what, 58 to 60%. So it seems to me that if this was to move forward, there'd have to be education around it. And do we have the time, the energy, and the funds to do the education we need to get this moving forward and really give it a chance? And if we don't, I don't know if it's the right time to do this.
All right, thank you. We'll go to Kelly.
Sorry, again. I'm very interested in seeing this move forward to another discussion in July. I think it's high time that we think seriously about a lodging tax and the funds that can be used to help improve arts and culture within the city of Littleton, which is a big draw for folks coming into Littleton. Thanks.
Great. All right. We go over to Patrick.
Yes, I was in support of this last year. The consultant, I thought did a maybe even a below job of going out there and going to enough community members. I thought we could have passed this last year. We have full support of the Littleton Business Chamber to push this agenda and bring the awareness out to the citizens as to what it really is, and not get caught up in the language that so often confuses people on the ballots. So I'm definitely in favor of moving this forward to July.
All right, Scott.
I wholeheartedly support a visitor tax, and I wholeheartedly support applying those revenues to support arts and culture in the city. But I do not believe that now is the time to do this for a few reasons. The first is that I don't think it's ever a great idea to push a tax increase during especially a deep economic downturn, such as the one that we're experiencing now. I think it would be a better time to do this once the Arts and Culture Commission is up and running a year from now. And can help us to guide this money toward the community's highest priorities. I think it's very important to recognize that the consultants in their survey and in their conclusions were saying to pass this, there's going to have to be a concerted marketing and outreach effort. And it's not at all clear to me where that's going to come from. Staff does not have the capacity to do it. And the grassroots, a lot of them are struggling right now for their very survival, right? Are these stakeholders in the arts and culture community in Littleton going to be able to devote resources to marketing this? And how would they even do it, right? They can't go door to door. Where's the money for mailers going to come from and so on? I don't think any of that kind of strategic conversation about resources has happened. And then I think the most important thing for me is it would be great to have a visitor tax, but I don't view it at this time as strictly necessary in the same way that I view a sales tax increase and the city being successful with a sales tax increase as strictly necessary, right? And we need to think through strategically how asking voters this year to support a lodging tax is going to affect our request potentially next year or the year after to support a sales tax. We cannot let nothing compromise our likelihood of success with the sales tax, right? If that effort fails, the city that we care so much about, I think is deeply threatened. And I just don't see that. As the case with the lodging tax. And I think we know intuitively that, if we ask back-to-back tax increase requests from the voters, we're more likely to lose on the second one. And I think especially if this is a long-term economic downturn, if we get turned down, or even if we win on the lodging tax this year, it could potentially compromise or jeopardize the sales tax increase next year. So for those reasons, I don't support it at this time.
Thank you, Scott. And then from my position on this, I think I'm concerned that with the economy as it is, and requesting a tax increase from our citizens for lodging, it's not good timing at all. This next year is going to be tough for a lot of businesses, including hotel businesses, motel businesses, the whole bit. And if this were to go to the citizens and it were to fail, it would be difficult to try to bring it back a year later or 2 years later when it could really be effective at that point when hopefully the economy is going. So if I have it right, then Scott, you're not in favor of putting it on the July 14 agenda, correct?
That's right.
Thumbs up, just let me know. Okay. Then I'm going to go to Patrick. Were you in favor of adding it to the agenda? Yes. Karina, you're a yes, no doubt. And then Carol for add it to the agenda? No.
No.
And Pam, where are you?
No.
Let's see. We have Kelly. You're in favor of it, and I'm opposed that at this point. Okay, so right now it is a 4-3, not a consensus to move this thing forward at this time. All right. So if we can, we're going to move on to our next item, which it is 8:20, and our next item, Mark, you want to bring up, or you want to discuss, what is it, the solid waste? Go ahead, if you will, City Manager.
Yeah, and again, this was a topic that we identified, a potential topic here coming out of the retreat. And I think Mayor Pro Tem here has an interest in this as well as some others. So I think there's a wide variety of issues tied to this, and I'll let the Pro Tem kind of address that. But we do have Keith Reister, hopefully in the audience, who could respond to some questions. But again, the real premise of this is trying to decide if there's interest in moving this forward in some fashion.
Yeah, thank you, City Manager. I'll try to be as brief as I can and just say that I'm not sure how I feel about this. I want to certainly hear about the fiscal ramifications from Public Works Director. There's a short list of topics that I hear about repeatedly from constituents, right? Things that are important to them, and solid waste is on that list, right? And what I feel is that there's got to be something done on this at some point, right? It could be that now is not the right time, depending on what kind of investment it's going to require from the city. But we've got an overabundance of haulers working daily in the city, causing noise and air pollution, causing quality of life issues, and degrading the streets that add to the city's maintenance costs. Doing something differently as a city in terms of solid waste would achieve a few things to my mind. First, we give ourselves an opportunity to do more with regard to recycling and potentially curbside composting. And additionally, it would reduce air pollution and noise pollution, as I mentioned. It is a topic under the sustainability umbrella that everyone on council knows is so important to me. At some point, we will have to address solid waste. So that's my brief thoughts about it.
All right. Thank you, Scott. Who else would like to chime in next? Carol, you would like to go? Carol and then Pam?
You're muted, Carol.
Unmute. Once again, I would like to say thank you, Scott, for saying that very well. We've had trash chaos for as long as I've lived in this city, 30 some years. And we have an opportunity with having both Keith Reister and Mark Ralph on our staff. Both of them are seasoned at dealing with this issue in a sane, calm way. To the best of my knowledge, Keith is an expert, a national expert in managing solid waste. And by that, I mean managing the providers of picking it up, not picking it up ourselves. So I would really like for us to go forward with this exploration. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Carol. We'll go to Pam and then Patrick, then Karina, then Kelly.
I see all the environmental advantages like Scott mentioned before, and I would be really interested in leveraging Keith's and Mark's expertise in terms of contracting this out, not specifically getting into the business of waste management for the city, but to hire reputable companies that could be options and just narrowing down the number of options, number of days, and increasing recycling and composting. So I would like to see it move forward.
Great, thank you. We'll go Patrick, then Karina, then Kelly.
You know, I'm okay moving forward on this, although I don't, it's not a, how do I say, I don't know if this is where the city needs to be spending our energies. Well, am I open to learning more? Absolutely. But do I want us to manage how many dump trucks are going through a neighborhood or how many trash trucks are going through a neighborhood? I don't think that's our responsibility. I think that's the responsibility of those neighborhoods to organize and figure it out themselves. I think that's government overreach, but I'm willing to listen.
Great, thank you. Karina?
Sorry. Thank you, Scott, for bringing this up. I'm actually of the same camp as Pat on this. I think this is a it's a private sector business. I think we already have plenty of HOAs that do have chosen to do that. And I do think that this is potentially can put us as a middleman, not unlike what we're experiencing in downtown now with some of the merchants. So that is, a concern I have from the resource of our staff. It's also a concern of then the perception being that it becomes the responsibility of the city. And I don't think that is a core service of the city. While I know that this is something that's, done in other places, given where our focus is and where, what's come out of the comp plan, this has not been identified as a critical request or opportunity at this time for the city. So honestly, it's not something that I would support further discussion at this time.
All right, thank you. And Kelly?
I definitely support this going forward. Been talking about this since last November. I think it behooves us to do all of the research, whether in fact it does continue to go forward based on recommendations by Keith and Mark, but at least we're getting that conversation going. I had a friend who just moved here from the Highlands, and she was absolutely dumbfounded as to why we don't have one trash collection company picking up trash around the area. The other thing is I think you may have quite a few citizens who would not support a sales tax increase if we didn't do something about the 7 or 8 trash companies that are going up and down our streets every day, trashing our roads, breaking up the pavement, costing the city a lot more money in infrastructure costs. So I think it's definitely something that we need to look into sooner rather than later. And I'm very interested in adding recycling and composting as a part of the trash collection process. And I agree with Pam. I think we don't need to be in the business of running that business ourselves, that we need to contract it out. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Kelly. And my position on this is I think in this coming year, we have too many unknowns for our city staff to be working on. And to add this, and I know the city staff will often say, well, this won't take that much additional time. But the bottom line is it's going to take additional time. It may not be a new department of some sort, but it is going to take time, especially to get this thing going. And then even though we do have at least maybe an expert right now with Keith won't always be here to run a program like that. I think also it is an expansion of the city responsibility to manage these contracts. And that's what it'll boil down to. The city will still be the one that receives all the complaints. I just don't think this is something that the city of Littleton needs to take on. When we talk about 7 trash trucks that go through neighborhoods, there's 2 in my neighborhood. One of them comes on Monday, the other one comes on a Friday. And then there's also recycling too that we do. And then I choose to do recycling. Not everybody does. But I think that the problem is maybe perceived to be bigger than what it actually is. So at this point, the question is, do we want to add this to our, it's a July 14th date, I believe. So council, I'm just going to go kind of around the horn.
Can I ask one question? In order to get a better handle, can we hear from Mark or Keith how much of a burden this is going to put on them in terms of time and effort to get this going and to manage? I mean, is it big? Is it medium, small?
My suggestion is we let Keith maybe address this. I think he's got a concept here about what we might inventory the issue a bit and help council kind of corral where this might go. It certainly has the potential of being something very large, but not necessarily. So maybe Keith, if you mind, I put you on the spot.
Yeah, that's no problem. I hope everybody can hear me. In terms of what can be accomplished between now and July, the only thing I can say that as a staff we could accomplish is we could basically bring you a presentation with a matrix of the range of options. They range from, the do nothing alternative to maybe some ordinance changes, all the way up to if you wanted to jump into the business. I already costed that out. And to go whole hog and become a hauler, you're going to need probably 18 million up front just to get into the business. I'm pretty sure the city manager will tell you, no, that's not available.
Let's not do that.
We can show you the range of options. I can tell you that beyond, the work that I would need to put in, there's gonna be a fair amount of work from our legal team, because even if we go out to contract for service and figure out how to do that, which I've been involved with before, I would suspect that we'll get sued, would be my expectation. And then, I've spoken with almost all of you about solid waste, which includes recycling, trash, composting, yard waste, alternatives to electronics disposal, all those kind of things. And, those are all available. And I have also learned here, having run systems here in Colorado, as well as private systems and public systems elsewhere in the country, even if you mandate a hauler, you will still have citizens in Littleton that will not use that hauler. Even if you're charging them every month, they will still use another hauler, because this is the West. And, there's people that will say, government cannot tell me who's picking up my trash. So we'll still have a fair number, the number of trucks will go down, but they won't go down as far as people think. And the other part is, because I'm a guy who has roads too, a typical trash truck weighs about, fully loaded, maxed out, probably about 45,000 pounds. Most moving trucks are twice that, and a fire truck is twice that, driving around the neighborhoods everywhere. So just to put a trash truck in comparison, to do that, I mean, there's a lot of alternatives here, and it is not, none of them are going to be a light load to get done. But we can bring you probably just an overview of where your alternatives are across that spectrum and what it would potentially take to do those alternatives, just to give you some framework to think about at that point in time. I can say pretty directly, though, that our ability to accomplish moving any of those alternatives forward in 2020 and 2021 is going to be very limited. And part of that is the staffing, and the other part is, the two folks we mentioned that have knowledge in this, we can't really dedicate a huge amount of time. And even if we hire a consultant, I'm going to have to manage that consultant, or we're going to have to hire somebody internally to manage that with a certain level of expertise. So we've got to kind of weigh that situation as well when we look at how we would proceed. For me, I'll just tell you personally, I love trash. If you're ever really bored, you can read my master's thesis on the comparative variables that drive trash collection and recycling in rural and urban communities. If you're really, really bored, I wouldn't even read it and I'd be bored. So, I trash and recycling's in my, soul. So I'm, all about that, but it is a big task for us, but we can bring you some ideas.
All right. Thank you, Keith. I'm just going to go around the horn now with the council. And the question is, do we want to add it to the agenda for July 14? So we're going to start with Carol.
Yes, I would like to. And I would like to add to this, piggybacking on Karina's comment that HOAs could do this if they want to. That's not the case in my neighborhood. It's Oak Brook, 500 homes. And because we have a voluntary HOA, that means it's optional to join it or not for each home. We cannot contract for a trash service. And within the older neighborhoods that don't have HOAs, there are quite a few of them in this part of town. And so we're dependent upon the city to do this for us. We can't do it ourselves. Yes, please, let's look at it.
Okay, I got Carol as a yes. Pam?
Yes, I would like to hear Keith's presentation and see what our options are.
All right, Kelly?
Yes, I'd like to move forward with this as well. Thank you.
Okay. Karina?
No, I think even just given what Keith just said, he can bring some options forward, but anything we move forward with is going to be heavy lifting. And we already know that we don't necessarily have the capacity to do that. I just don't think it's the right time to have a conversation that we likely know may not move forward in the near term.
Patrick?
Again, I'm going to change mine. I don't think we have the capacity, again, based on what Keith just said, to go to a study session. My ask of the community would be, I can look at Scott and Carol and Pam and ask, has your neighborhood tried to organize and do two or three trash and I see Carol shaking her head. Well, here's the reality. You're still at 8 people because you guys can't come to an agreement. So now you can go to the city and ask the city to force it down their throat. And now we're in a legal situation. So I'm out of this conversation.
Okay. So you're no. Scott.
Keith's comments about he and his staff's bandwidth pretty impactful for me. I'd like to see the matrix. I don't think that's going to be too much of an investment of counselor staff resource. Sounds like Keith's got it pretty ready to go. I want to at least know what our options are here.
You're a yes?
I would be satisfied with seeing the matrix of options. I'm a yes to that.
Okay, great. And I am a no. So we do have 4. So we will put that on the study session agenda, City Manager, for July 14.
Will do.
Great. Let's move on to our last item, which is the short-term rental or /code issue that we were going to discuss?
Yeah, so I know that we've been talking ever since I've been here, quite honestly, about short-term rentals. As council knows here, a couple of years ago, we gave a pretty good run at it, but we're not successful in creating a new ordinance. So we have the current council who has expressed some interest in trying to get this move forward. In fact, you established it as a pretty high priority back on your retreat. Then we had the COVID-19 come up, and the July 14th is the date for which we would be coming back to council to reassess the priorities with the intent of having the COVID-19 hopefully pretty well in hand. So I think certainly has also been a few emails here by a couple of houses that have really struggled with this issue, and more about a nuisance than anything else. And this, as some of the council will remember, this is kind of how it started the first time around. So here's my suggestion in kind of short term and certainly in the longer view. I would look to the July 14th date. That's for when the staff would come back to council, reassess the priorities, and we could come back with some strategies again here about the short-term rental. Between now and July, I think that what I would suggest is that staff really kind of step up a level of review and enforcement here when it comes to perhaps what we would call more of the nuisance aspect of this. And I know that one resident in particular has had a real challenge with, again, another party house. And so through the police department and the code enforcement, we certainly could do some things here to kind of keep the pressure on these party houses. And perhaps more importantly, between now and then, I would like to suggest that I have Ryan Thompson, really, he's our city mediator, and have him step into this role immediately and contact these properties that have, this perception of, and perhaps a real reality of a party house, and have him kind of work with the property owners and see what we can do to come into some more reasonable compliance. In the end, of the long term, that probably is not the solution, but certainly in the very short term, Ryan can be pretty effective on many issues. So that's kind of my suggestion here for the short term, and then a deeper conversation on July 14th about short-term rental.
Great. So the question that we have for council right now is, we have two questions. I think what you've posed is that you're looking for a direction from council for more of a heavier code enforcement at this time, especially for the nuisance properties. And I would like to expand that to beyond rental type properties, that any property that seems to be a nuisance, I would like to see and maybe council's decision to go forward with being more follow-up, not only when staff goes out to voice a concern at a property, that there be a follow-up to see, did that property indeed do what they said they would do to correct the problem? So the question, you're looking for two things, I believe, Mark. One, you're looking for more a firmer enforcement, permission or guidance from the council. And two, do we put short-term rentals on the agenda for July 14?
Correct.
All right, so those are two issues, council. We'll start with Patrick.
Yeah, this was brought up last year, and again, I was in favor of doing some type of enforcement, putting some type of ordinance together, and I still am. I think this is a big enough issue that was brought up at the retreat. There's enough concern. As Mark knows, the two sides got together over the last year and came up with what they believe is a pretty good solution, a good compromise between the two sides of the table. And so I'd like to take their work and share that with council, discuss that plan, and let's get something on the books so we can enforce it, because just telling people to be quiet for the night doesn't do much it doesn't give the police any teeth. So I would like to continue this conversation.
All right, cool. We'll go to Karina, then Carol.
I'm supportive of taking this to the study session. I think this nuisance was something that, I was under the impression that we could solve for with our current processes and procedures. So I am disappointed that we can't. I like your suggestion, Mark, as far as getting Ryan involved. As far as what's being brought to the study session, I think, one of my concerns with this previously, it became, it started becoming much more than what we were really trying to solve for, which is, again, this nuisance and respect of your neighbors. So I think that's where we have to, just be measured in our approach of balancing what we're really trying to address, as opposed to making it, not effective, right, for a lot of other reasons. Great. So, part of it.
Thank you. Carol?
I'm looking for clarification from Mark and Jerry both. Are we looking at two different things here? Number one, Mark, are you asking us to ask you to have more follow through on enforcement of existing codes? Correct. So we're saying that existing codes can help, but we need to enforce them more thoroughly.
They would be a real high priority and making not.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would like to give Mark direction to do that, and I would also like to see this on a study session in the near future.
Great, thank you. Pam, and then Kelly.
I'm not only supportive, I'm excited that we're finally going to address this again, and hopefully with the two groups that have gotten together, they've done a lot of preliminary work, and maybe we can do something, to Karina's point, that is not so comprehensive that we get real complicated. So even if we do some sort of phase in or step-by-step approach to get something to maintain the integrity of our neighborhood. So yes, and the strategic July 14th session. Also in terms of code enforcement, this would be a great short-term solution for the woman who is having trouble with the party house, and using Ryan and code enforcement, I think would be a great first step in terms of helping out this neighbor and other neighbors who may experience more of this as the summer progresses. So yes, on both counts.
Great. We'll go to Kelly.
Yes, on both counts too. I agree with everybody's comments thus far, and I appreciate Ryan being the voice of the city, both to the neighbors that are being impacted and to the property owners as well. So thanks.
Great, thank you. Pro Tem?
The reports that council gets from citizens having to deal with these short-term rentals that have become party houses they're just agonized, right? And these citizens absolutely do not deserve that, right? They have a right of quiet enjoyment of their property, and this is just such a major quality of life issue. I mean, I've had these not exactly short-term rentals, but living in New York City, you get the just ridiculously loud, obnoxious neighbors, and it just destroys quality of life and makes it hard to sleep and so on. I'm absolutely all about enforcing and getting these people back their right of quiet enjoyment of their property. I guess on the second point, I have a clarification question, which is, sure, I'm all about doing this in the near term during a July study session, but I had it in mind that we were going to address this during the neighborhood block of the ULUC, and I don't know sort of what the timeline for that will be, and if it makes more or less sense to do it sooner rather than later, or later rather than sooner. I'll reiterate what I've always thought about this, which is that it should not be that heavy a policy lift for council and the community stakeholders who put together this preliminary document. I think have done a lot of work for us. I think they've come up with a workable framework. So.
Quick comment on that, Pro Tem. I think you kind of hit one of the central issues that we would talk about July 14th. Obviously, our code work, we intended to take on the short-term rental issue. Accessory dwelling units is kind of a related topic. So that's kind of the longer view. But also, my thought was on the July 14th is that we would bring forward this proposal that was drafted by the two kind of opposing positions here, and probably start with that. And maybe there are some ways, Reed and I have talked about this a little bit. Maybe there are some ways for us to step into this a little bit to address some of the issues. And then obviously the code update would be the last opportunity for council to kind of fine tune everything.
Great. All right. Thank you. Thank you very much. And for me, yes, I'm looking forward to giving direction to the council or to the city manager to step up on the code enforcement and follow up, and also on the short-term rentals. I'm looking forward to that. So I'm just going to go back one more time for first. I'm going to just ask about codes. Is everybody, all council members, you're all in favor of stepping up to codes and follow up? Is there anyone not? Okay, so Mark, I think you have your direction on that, not just enforcement, but also follow up. Scott, you have a question?
No, I just wanted to add one thing. I don't want my comments to be construed in any way as casting aspersions on short-term rental owners in general. Right, there are a lot of really outstanding operators in our community, and they deserve this action from council just as much as the affected sort of neighbors. So
yeah, I agree, Scott. And the code enforcement isn't just going to be short-term rentals. There's another one a couple blocks from me that has an issue. It's not a short-term rental. It's about storage of stuff in front of their house that has just gone way overboard, and it's a violation of code. So it's just a matter now of if we're in code violation, not that we're going to run around looking for code violations, but when a citizen calls, they do expect some, not just for city to go talk to them, but also maybe a follow-up. And I think that's what we're looking for here, short-term rental or something else. So, Mark, I think you have your direction on that. Appreciate that. So now on the adding to the July 14 agenda will be for the short-term rentals, the beginning of a new discussion. And remind council that we discussed it for about 8 months last time, and it does get more complicated than one would think. So it is going to take us, it isn't going to be just 1 or 2 meetings here. It's going to be quite a bit, and I think Reed will be very busy. So we'll start with Patrick on the short-term rental added to the agenda.
Well, absolutely, and I don't know if it'll be that big of a conversation as it was before, Jerry. I think a lot of the conversation has been had, and I think between the two groups coming together, I'm hoping, that compromise that they came up with is something that is agreeable to council. So that's my hope. But yes,
good points. Good points,
yep.
Karina.
Yeah, I'm still supportive of it. I think it's it's up to us to limit the scope so that it doesn't become such a big discussion.
Great, thank you, Carol.
Yes.
Pam.
Yes.
Kelly.
Yep. Thank you.
All right, Scott.
Yeah.
All right, and I'm a yes as well. So we'll add that to our July 14. We'll begin our discussion then. And I think you're right, Patrick. Hopefully it won't be near as complicated as because we've got a lot of from last 8 months. So cool. All right. Mark, did you have any other items that you have for your reports?
I just sent council today as well an update from Keith Reister, our Public Works Director, on some construction activities, and I would encourage council to take a look at that. I also copied Kelly Nardi, so we're going to make sure that the public gets to see here that even under the current conditions of COVID-19, we're moving ahead here with a lot of construction.
Yeah, cool. And just before we wrap up our meeting, can you just give us one more synopsis here on or an update on where we are on our block party, or not our block party, but closing Main Street? It's been a long meeting, so I'd kind of like just to refresh everybody's memory.
Well, I think my summary would be that we have submitted a plan to Tri-County Health, kind of our final plan on last Friday. So we're optimistic to hear this week. To move forward, we have a meeting here with the restaurants and bars here specifically. Others are invited tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock to kind of talk through the logistics. Staff's worked hard at trying to overcome some of the problems that the merchants kind of raised, but we haven't been able to overcome everything. Staff is going to be looking at implementing some kind of a survey here, after a couple of weeks anyways, try to get a gauge here of how this is working for people and make adjustments as necessary. And the last piece is that I would add is I'm looking to the CARES Act to hopefully pay for this here for the merchants in the long run this year.
Great. So just for the public, then the bottom line is yes, it does look as though we're going to move forward with the date. What was it? It was June 6th or June 12th or something like that on a Friday.
Correct. Yeah, we're going to try to get it done obviously as soon as possible. But as Kelly Nardi pointed out, we want a kind of a critical mass here that's ready to go so that when we do open it up, it looks very inviting and first-class professional.
Great. Thank you. Karina, did you have a question?
Yeah. So given that you're having a call tomorrow, it does sound like we all can't be there for the same reasons that we can't be on the RISE meeting. So can it be recorded just like the RISE meetings are? So we can hear from the businesses and stuff so we can get that feedback as well?
No problem. It's technology's easy on that issue.
Good. Thank you.
Good.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Great. Thank you. Anything else, Mark?
No, I do not, Mayor. I am
All right.
done for the evening.
City Attorney, do you have any comments?
You know, my only comment would be restaurants are opening tomorrow. So support our restaurants downtown and other places in Littleton. Try to make a reservation if you can and frequent some of our businesses. That's my
Great,
legal,
thank you.
my legal update.
All right. All right, thank you for the legal update. A couple things. City Manager, when is the next Envision Studio coming up? Do you have that date by chance?
Yeah, let's see. We have, I'm sorry, let me pull up a calendar here. We have, I'm sorry, I can't remember, Mayor. I'd have to confirm that.
June
That's-
4th?
and that's-
June 4th is what I have on my calendar.
Oh, excellent. Thank you, Kelly. So we're going to go with June 4th, Mark.
I don't have that on my calendar, so I'm a little worried about that date.
I think that's an old one. I think that was the old schedule.
Yeah.
All right. So, well, Mark, City Manager will be letting us all know. And I have
I don't know.
a
Never
couple
mind.
other items
Right,
that for council, our next meeting is June 2nd. That's next Tuesday, and it is followed by a study session. So be prepared for that. And my last item that I have before we adjourned is Mark has requested to take some time off this Friday, part of Thursday and part of Friday. And I would like us all to honor his time off. We have Randy Young, the assistant director for the city, who's very competent. And if we could direct everything to Randy, and then if Randy needs to get a hold of Mark, let's let that happen. But I think if we could all use Randy for the coming weekend, that would be great. Karina?
Yeah, and I just have one more ask again to Mark, because we're getting so many emails with very important information, like even the presentation we had tonight with Kelly. If we can either house them in Granicus, maybe related to tonight, or even actually on the RISE website with some of these items, it's just easy to reference and accessible to everyone. So if I can just ask that continue to happen.
Yeah, and as well as the presentation that Kelly and Elizabeth did tonight, if you could send that up to us, that'd be great.
Exactly.
Okay, but again, back to Mark. If we could give Mark some time off this coming weekend, I think that'd be good for everybody. So if you could, Randy, if you don't have Randy's number, get a hold of Becky, and she'll make sure you have it. Cool. If we have nothing else, it is 8:56, and we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.